everybody, as you're joining us. We are so happy you have made it to the last breakout session of our time. You have done it. 2 days of virtual convening can be very challenging. I know that. So we hope you had a good lunch. Well, please pay attention to the chat. Keegan, our facilitator, just popped something in there. And I'm going to continue to admit people for a couple more minutes. We just want to thank you, though, for joining us for this final breakout session. I am Katie Biggs. I'm the Director of Operations at Neighborworks, Montana, and I am your room host for this breakout session. And we are so excited that you've joined us. We ask that you do mute your lines and use the chat function. For questions, we will try and address all questions before the end of the session, or Keegan might reach out during the middle and just ask if there are questions from the crowd. Just a few key housekeeping items. All sessions are being recorded. Please mute your lines and turn off your video while the presenters are presenting, or leave on your video. I haven't found that to be a big issue. We used to put that in there because there was bandwidth issues, but it doesn't seem to be a big issue lately. Please click the chat icon, select all panelists and attendees, and then you can see that Keegan asked for a few different prompts in there. Each of you should have received a whiteboard paddle and a marker in the mail. If you find something inspiring, exciting, or new, write a quick adjective on the whiteboard and hold it up. I get the privilege of introducing you guys all to Keegan. She is fantastic. She is based out of Missoula, and she is doing really great work helping support many nonprofits through consulting work across the state. She also is actually executing Neighborworks Montana's strategic plan with us and has guided us through a very cool process to do that. So she's got great insight and is just will give us great insight about committee meetings. So Keegan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for having me. And I know that it's the afternoon and I get that. So let's make this as engaging as possible. There isn't a lot of us here. So like, feel free to just come off mute and I'll either tell you I'm getting to that or I'll answer the question right there. We'll have time at the end where we can just do some probably problem solving and that kind of thing. And yeah, people getting off topic is a really big challenge. We'll talk about that. Please mute your, and Katie, I think you can help with muting folks too, just so we don't staying on track, side conversations. Great. Cool. Well, this presentation I'm giving you today was born out of the fact that at one point I was managing 16 committees. I was interim director at 2 foundations nationwide and helping run a capital campaign in Missoula. And so I had so many committees and I was attending meetings where I felt like I kind of just wanted to poke my eye out sometimes. And so I just decided like, let's do a training that on tips and tricks on how to make meetings more effective. So I'm going to share my screen again. If you have questions, like throw them in the chat. Katie will interrupt me if it feels like it's the right time. You can also just unmute and ask a quick question. And again, I'll just let you know if I'm getting to it or if we, and then at the end, let's just like ask questions and try to problem solve. And this is what I have found works. There's everyone's unique, every organization's unique, every committee is unique. So just adapt these and take what you can. So I will, without further ado, so today we're going to talk about like how to prepare for committee meetings, kind of talk about agendas, like how to create good agendas, some tips and tricks for facilitation, and then learn how to use like follow-up to help people be accountable. Because I think that that's another really hard thing is like, how do you follow up after a meeting and keep people accountable, right? Especially when you have years. So one of my questions that I'd love to have you drop in the chat is just an estimate. How many meetings do you think you attend a week? 4. It's not bad. Others? 5. 5 plus. 10 plus. That's a lot, Sam. 15, 18. Well, that's a lot. Yeah. So This is why I care so much about meetings and why tips and tricks to make them go well. So for me, I think the hardest part is preparation. But if you take time in planning, it makes everything else flow better. And once you get used to it, it becomes easier and you can be faster at it. So the first thing is committee structure, and then we're going to talk about the agenda and then talk about scheduling. So in committees, the first thing is like, what's the purpose of the committee? Like when you bring people on and when you're determining, you know, if it's a fundraising committee, great, but like what's their purpose? Are they supporting a development director? Is it a volunteer committee and there is no person doing development, and so they're actually doing the work? Or is it a communication committee? Is it an ad hoc committee? Is it a DEI committee? Like what is the purpose? And what are their goals? So if it's the fundraising committee, what's their goal? Like, is their goal to raise $150,000 this year? Is their goal to bring in new donors? Like, what are they working towards? And then roles and responsibilities. That's really important for the committee, so they understand like what their role is, what they're responsible for. It's just all lined out. And then what's the decision-making process? So is it a consensus-making decision process? Do you do kind of like majority votes? Do you know, just being really clear what that is? I think often too, committees, what will happen is it doesn't feel good when a committee makes a decision and then someone overrides it and they didn't understand that someone else had the decision-making authority. So just like onset, you know, and who has the ultimate authority, right? Like just be transparent. The chair has content knowledge or is willing to learn some things. They have leadership and facilitation skills. They have confidence in committee members. They energize the group and have time. That's really important for a chair. And I think confidence in other committee members is also a really important thing for the chair. If they don't feel like the other people on the committee are doing anything, or they're, you know, whatever it is, then it's just like, it kind of becomes their committee, and that's not super fair, right? And then members. So members understand their role. That's where their role and responsibilities are. They're willing to engage. They have the ability to follow through, and they have skills or experience to assist in completing the goals. I actually don't they have skills or experience, or they're willing to learn skills and, you know, to achieve goals. And I think it's totally okay to bring people on who might not have the skills or knowledge yet, but you have to be dedicated in giving them the tools they need to be successful, right? Because I think a really great thing about committees is that they're really great leadership development tools. So people can learn to work with a team, and they can, you know, work towards a goal with others and that type of thing. I think also committees are a really great way to like test out a potential board member, right? Like maybe this is a great person to join our board. Let's see if it's a good fit. And if they, you know, if they have the time and they're good at follow through and those types of things. So that's another way to think about committee members too, is this is the question I like to ask. What tasks are the committee responsible for, and who among our staff, volunteers, members possess the skills and experience needed to complete those tasks? Or who is willing to learn those skills to complete those tasks? And then the other question I like to ask is, what diverse vantage points allow for better decision making? So that's another way when I think about members, right? And when you're building your committee. So any questions about the structure, chair, members before I move on and how I outline those? Or things you look for when you're recruiting committee members? Great, we'll move on. So the next kind of important thing is meeting scheduling. So if you can have a set schedule, our calendars are really busy. And if you can say, we meet every third Thursday at 4 o'clock, like that's just really helpful. The other thing is if you don't have a set schedule, is to try to schedule them 1 week in advance. Often committee members are either really busy or they're volunteers, and to just expect that they can show up the next day and feel prepared isn't a really fair expectation. Also, some people are processors, and when you, not even just processors, but when you feel like you can like identify the important items, look at them in advance, then you feel that just more valuable when you're contributing, right? If you have time to think about, oh, this is what's on the agenda. I actually have to report on something, so I better, that kind of thing. So I think that I really like to do at least 1 week in advance for meetings to give people time to prepare. And it also just sets an expectation and like a sign of respect that like we respect your time. We don't understand, like, we know you can't just be available on a whim, that type of thing. So one other thing that I skipped over in my notes that I want to talk about the chair really quick is the chair often is the facilitator of the meeting. And so they are kind of responsible for following the agenda, keeping participants on track. And so if this is the good one. So you get off topic and they ask the question like, is this related to the topic that we're discussing right now? Or should this item be added to the end of the agenda or to our next agenda, right? It's like a really easy way when you get off topic. And they just make sure that at least everyone says one thing in the meeting, right? Invites people to talk if they're willing, and then ensures one person speaks at a time. So that's the other thing about the chair, and that's part of those facilitation skills, and we'll get more deep into those. But I think it's important to note that like the chair is often facilitating unless you're hiring an outside facilitator. So the agenda. So I think the first question is like, who's responsible for creating it? And the answer to this question is, it depends. But it's important to figure it out from the onset. So if it's a committee meeting with only board members, then maybe the chair should be developing the agenda, right? Or the chair is doing it with an executive director, right? If it's staff or volunteers, then it's usually staff helping the chair or a collaborative effort. I've been part of committees where I just create the agenda and the chair says, great, I want to add this one thing. And it's, it's kind of, I try to, sometimes staff can do the heavy lifting for that volunteer, which is really helpful. But I think just determining on the outset, like who is responsible for doing it, again, is for the roles and responsibilities. The other thing is when I think about what the agenda should look like is purpose. So like, why are you bringing people together? Outcome, what do you hope to accomplish? And process, how will you engage people in moving towards the desired outcome? So that's one way that I think about creating agendas is it's kind of POP is the acronym. So purpose, outcome, and process is a great way to think about agendas. The other thing that I do when I create agendas is I create them in a bell shape. So the first couple items or the first item is like an easy item. And then the middle of the agenda is like meatier and discussion. And then the things at the end of the agenda are things where like, if we don't get to them, it's okay. Right? Because we got the important stuff done or the decisions made or that type of thing. So I try to do them that way. Like, let's ease in, we'll get into the meat of things and we'll end on a easy note or a note where we'll just do it next time. So it's another way that I think about creating agendas. Where do you find agenda items? There's like a million places, really. But one is meeting minutes. So from the notes from last time, some people call them minutes, some people call them notes, but looking there, new correspondence, if you have an organizational calendar. So if you're fundraising committees are just an easy, but if you're the fundraising committee, like what are your events? When are your big appeals? That type of thing can help determine, and then input from either members or staff. So those are 4 really great ways to think about where to find agenda items. So if you're doing a board committee, you can look at the board governance calendar and see what they're doing and that type of thing. So that's a great one. And then when do you send it out to members? So when I say you schedule, I recommend scheduling 1 week in advance. I also recommend sending the agenda 1 week in advance, because again, it just gives them time to prepare if they need to review anything. You're not expecting them to look at something overnight, to feel prepared for a meeting. Gives them time. And explain. So I have actually a sample one here that I did. So the logistics, who created this? It was staff with chair input and approval. Where did I find the items? I went to meeting on minutes, and then there was a recent event that I used the evaluation, and then the meeting is on June 30th. So I'm sending it June 23rd. But to start with introductions and a quick overview, and I always write the meeting goals on the agenda so everyone knows what's going to happen that day. And then I have fundraising reports, we have overview questions. So that was the easy thing, right? Like, I'm just going to quick show you where we're at. We're doing really well. We're not doing well. Here's why, or whatever it is. And then this is the meaty part. So signature event, history. Let's talk about the feedback and the big meaty discussion here is like, should we continue offering our signature event, right? And then at the end, if there was time, they were going to overview the sponsor list and see if, we could create a new list. But again, that was put there because it wasn't super important. And then wrap up in next steps. And this is where you would list the action items again. So yeah, this is just kind of a sample. This is an easy one. I know they're not always this easy, but just showing that kind of bell curve and where things came from and that kind of thing. So any questions about agendas and kind of my approach to creating them?
Will you remind me what POP stands for?
Yes, I have a handout I'm going to pop in the chat at the end too, but it is purpose, outcome, process. So purpose is why are you bringing people together? Outcome is what do you want to accomplish at your meeting? That's where the meeting goals are for me. And then process, how will you engage your participants? So what kind of discussion do you want? What kind of questions are you going to ask? That kind of thing. So
Thanks.
Yeah. Great. So facilitation, this is also helps with that problem that people talked about of off track. So the facilitator role, so again, it's often the chair, and they ensure the group follows its own agenda, norms, and processes. And so if you have if you decided you're consensus based and you're making a decision, the chair kind of maybe reviews that process and make sure that the committee is adhering to it. Or if you always run by your plans with an advisory group or something, says oh, we gotta, before we vote on this, we have to do this, and then we'll come back next meeting or something like that. So that's where that goes. They respect the group's time, so the start and finish on time. I know it's hard to be on time to meetings, but I promise you that if you start them on time, people will start showing up on time. Because they don't want to miss things, right? And so I always try to start right on the dot if that's what we agreed to. And I always end on time. And if something's not going to end on time, what I do is say do people have time to stay late today? When we realize we're moving beyond the agenda, or something has come up, or things are taking longer than we thought. And if people say no, we'll be great, we're going to put this on the next agenda. But if people say, sure, let's do it, then we do it. But as a group, we make that decision. The facilitator doesn't make the decision to stay long for the group. Keep realistic expectations. I think it's hard to facilitating and be we're going to start this conversation, but we only have an hour and a half today, so we'll continue it next time. And just acknowledging that can be really hard, but is part of a process. And it's, sometimes they're big decisions and you need multiple conversations before you make a decision or take action. Read the room, so a vibe check. If people seem really tired or there seems tension, says wow, I feel there's something not being said here. Is anyone willing to share? Or you all look really tired. Should we not address this topic today because it's taking more brain power and it's 4 o'clock on a Friday? That type of thing. Move with transparency. And so, overview of the agenda. Say you guys were going off topic. that kind of thing, and just keeping it, it's the chair, the facilitator is facilitating, but it's the committee as a whole that's doing the work, and just acknowledging that. So everyone should be in on what's going on. And then just creates an opportunity for everyone to participate. So when I create agendas, I often, if it's a bigger agenda and I have more time, but I'll try to do things where it's individual work. And then I try to do small group work and then large group work. And the reason I do that is because some people need some time to process when a question's answered and get their thoughts together before they talk in front of others. Small group is great for people who don't love to talk in front of large groups. And then large group is for those people who love that, right? Like trying to meet people at where they're comfortable at, and creating activities and discussions around those different types of learning, those different type of comfortability, that kind of thing. So I think an important thing about facilitators is what they're not. So they're not experts. They don't dominate the speaking space. They're not neutral all the time, unless you've hired an outside facilitator and you hired someone to be neutral, right? But typically you're the facilitator, and if they're involved in the group, they're gonna have an opinion, and they might be biased sometimes, and they don't need to remain neutral all the time. They don't allow the group to stray from the agenda without consent. They don't rush to conclusions, especially if you do a vibe check and people don't seem ready to make a decision, or they're saying they're not ready, then you're not trying to rush through things, and then do everything themselves. The chair, the facilitator, whoever is facilitating, should not have to do everything. That's like being part of a small group in middle school where you write the report and everyone else plays basketball, right? Like, doesn't feel good. One hot tip I want to give you for facilitating, if you want to attend a really good training, is there is a training called by Compass Point for facilitation with an equity lens. It's a really great fundamentals of facilitating and ways to create inclusive spaces that I think it's around $250 for a half day. It was pretty affordable, and definitely something that I recommend if you're interested in just even a reminder. When I did it, I was like, oh yeah, that. And I took some great tools from it. And it was just a great way to kind of brush up on my facilitation skills. So I think it's good for all people who feel really experienced and people who are brand new to it. So I just wanted to give that hot tip. Questions about facilitation?
There are none in the chat, so you can keep rolling if you want.
Okay, sweet. So the other thing in facilitation is I like to create ground rules for meetings, and not every meeting, but if you have a committee, say let's do ground rules, and sometimes I put them on the back of the agenda so they're easy to reference. It's just to create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, right? And so using ground rules to ensure that everyone understands what behavior is accepted and what's acceptable. I think it was Compass Point. It might have been a different training that I did out of Chicago, an anti-racism training, but they call their ground rules courageous space instead of safe space. How to create a courageous space, because sometimes you have to be uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to speak up and disagree with people, and so if you create a courageous space where you encourage people to, not go with the group think or not go with the norm, better decisions are made, better decision lenses are laid out, and that type of thing. And so ones that I use are start and end on time. Put your phones away, be present, step forward, step back. So the way I explain that is if you don't tend to talk a lot, I challenge you to step forward. If you do tend to talk a lot or talk first, take a step back. And so what that looks like is waiting for 3 people to talk before you do, or inviting someone else who hasn't talked into the space, right, before you speak up. One diva, one mic, so one person speaks at a time, and then just find your own voice, use I statements. So if you have other ground rules that you use that you want I would love to hear what they are, because I think there's always new ones. Assume best intentions, respect. Respect is a little hard for me because I'm like, respect can mean something different for everyone on this call. So I like to try to explain what they, explain them out a little bit. But I think that the more ideas and suggestions we have for ground rules, the better we can make these spaces where they feel valuable and they feel meaningful, and it helps move the work forward. So if you have any, please share in the chat, so for others to see. So that's kind of facilitation tips and tricks. Meeting follow-up. So this is where you get people to hopefully do things, right? So, because often there's work between committee meetings that has to be done. So the first is minutes or notes, whatever you want to call them. I feel like notes is less formal. So if that's the kind of culture of your committee, great. And they kind of serve as a record of the meeting. So you just want to do them in a way that's clear, concise, and just conveys the meaning of any actions taken. And they should contain enough detail to make them useful. If you need to reference them, like I said, if you're going back to find agenda items or things like that, or what did we decide and why did we, right? It's a great, if you're evaluating something, great to look back and then just show that action was taken. I think like things that I like to include are alternatives considered for an important decision. So if you're talking about, should we continue our signature event? What would the other options be? Or I was talking to a group the other day and I was like, you have these like 3 ways the program could move forward here, and then decision of why you chose the way you did. A summary of key points for any reports given, not like word for word, but just highlights, right? We served this many people at lunch the other day. And so let's, or we made dinners for 12 moms, but not all the nitty gritty. And because you can always attach those reports to the notes. Recusals from discussions and if you're going to abstain from voting, that needs to be in your notes, especially if you have a conflict of interest or something like that. Votes that were against a motion is really important. So if Katie decides that she doesn't feel comfortable with it, it should be noted. And then action items. So those are the things that I always look for. There's mistakes is like to document or provide a clear description about like why a decision was made or an action was taken. Drafting a transcript of everything that was said at the meeting, because often there's information that might be harmful to the organization if read to someone without context, right? If someone outside the organization read it without context, it could be harmful to the organization or to the person reading them, right? Drafting and distributing minutes like forever after a meeting, because so much time has passed, they usually don't look at them or they're not relevant anymore. And then just saving your minutes or like your notes in the same place you can find them. Other people are more organized than others, but like a place where you can actually find them and reference them and pull them up and that kind of thing. So those are just little tips and tricks for minutes. In terms of action items, so I always like under next steps to just write all of the action items to kind of say who's committed to do things. And the way that I do it is like, what's the action, who's responsible, and when's it gonna be done by. And so one thing that you can do when you keep getting off track, or if you have someone who really struggles following the agenda, or someone who really just brings up kind of random things, is give them a task at the meeting. And so you can actually have like an action note taker who at the end of the meeting says, here are the things that we said we would do, and this is who said they would do them by when. It gives them like another opportunity to be very involved, but not derail any of the agenda items or conversation. Or if there's someone who's trying to build skills and is like, I'm here because I want to learn, and then you can also give them a really great a really great task of doing that. And just reviewing all of those at the end of the meeting. Another thing that I do is when after the meeting, to get people to follow up, I try to email the notes within 48 hours. And then in the body of the email, I cut and paste the action items. So you don't even have to open the document that I've attached, right? To see who said they would do what. Sometimes I even, like the other day, I was at a meeting and I just sent it to the one person who I know has a million things to do and was like, here are your 2 things, right? Like, and then have the committee chair follow up with members like 2 weeks before a meeting and just say, hey, or even respond to that email and say, hey, we're meeting in 2 weeks. Hope you're moving along with your things, right? Like that reminder, because we're all really busy. And then when you send the agenda the week before the meeting, just note if someone's going to have to report on their action item. And because that helps them hold them accountable, but it also doesn't like blindside them. And if, in case they weren't able to look at the agenda ahead of time, it's just kind of like a common courtesy because we all get busy. So we have time, we have 30 minutes, which I knew we would, because I am a fast talker. So I just want to know, like, what questions do you have? Are there like common things that you are like, how do I get over this barrier? Like I'm 100% it's happening to 7 other people on this call. So, and there's no like bad questions or, just like, let's like learn from each other. Or if you have tips and tricks to share that's worked really well with you, like I am not an expert, I just do it a lot. And so I can always learn from you guys too. So I would love to hear what.
Keegan, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
At what point do you make the decision, or how do you go about making the decision to kill a committee? So say you have a committee, it constantly is feeling burdensome, it constantly is feeling a waste of time. There is occasionally work that needs to be done. So maybe it like becomes a task force. Where do you find that balance between a committee versus a task force to get things done?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that it happens a lot. And I think sometimes institutionally, you will be like, we've had this committee for 20 years. We can't kill it, right? So I think that you go back to that purpose and you go back to their goals. And if there's no purpose or goals, it's a pretty easy conversation, not easy, but it's a conversation saying like, I think we like worked ourselves out of a committee, right? And I think what we should do is be a task force or come back as an ad hoc committee if there's like a specific thing to do, right? Like I was just working with an ad hoc strategic planning committee and they were in operation for twice a week for 6 weeks or 6 months, right? And then they're done. And they knew that. And they knew they were signing up for a short-term thing, which is also a great way to recruit committee members when they know it's not a committee that's going to just go on forever. They're like, oh, I would love to work on that for 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is. So I think part of committees too that doesn't happen is assessing them like an annual, like how's it going? How are our agendas going? People seem not to be coming. Why is that? Right? And they might say, well, we don't have enough to do, or we feel like we've accomplished it. Like, just having that conversation again, in a respectful way. And I think is really important and a great thing to add to kind of your agenda calendar, right? Like every December, let's just evaluate the great work we've done, what was hard, and what we should do moving forward, if we should even move forward.
I love that. It makes you feel not stuck.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Feel free to throw them in the chat too, and I can read them to Keegan if you guys need. She's got a great wealth of knowledge for us, so take advantage of the little bit we have with her. Oh, we have a question coming. Okay. Not a question, but maybe helpful for others. I do the minutes for a reoccurring monthly meeting. I found that typing notes while the meeting happens is helpful, but to also record meetings when possible. I also made a pre-fillable template of our minutes so that I can check off attendees and document in the moment without having to worry about too much prep or falling behind.
Oh, I love that. That's a great tip, Amanda. Thank you. Another tip is I actually create the next agenda like immediately, at least draft it immediately after the meeting. like, I'm like, oh, agenda item, putting it into the next one, right? So you don't forget. So what do you recommend doing with an unruly member? Yeah, so I mean, everyone there is there for like good reason, right? They want to help. I always think it's just helpful to sit down and say, like, what are your goals? What are your expectations? And just have that conversation of if they align, right? I was helping with a committee, and the majority of members were wanting to go one way, and there was one person who actually wasn't even technically a member, but was a kind of an advisory person who kept taking it a whole nother way. And it wasn't technically their committee, and they had great ideas, right? But that wasn't the space to do that. And so I just sat them down and said, like, I see where you're going, but I'm not sure this is the right place to do it. Can we brainstorm like where we could take this in a way that things can actually get done, right? And because they constantly felt like they're being shut down. And I was like, well, this group of people doesn't have the capacity to do that really big task right now, right? So usually it's a conversation, but again, it's hard because they're often volunteers, and firing volunteers is the worst feeling on the face of the planet. So, just thinking about how to hone that person's energy. And I work with someone often who's just really good at like projects, like give her one thing to do and she nails it, right? And so I just kind of individually meet with her, and I'm like, so the group is working on this, but we need you to get this one thing done because you're really good at it. This is your expertise, just really leaning in on like what, they have great things. But sometimes it's a one-on-one conversation to be like, I see that you want to do these things, but our goals are here. So is there a better fit somewhere else? Or because I feel like the way I say it is like, I feel like we just keep disappointing you, which doesn't feel good for anyone, is kind of how I approach it. Is that a helpful, or do you want more? Oh, Janelle, that's amazing. Okay, perfect, Caitlin. It's hard when you don't have, we have to be respectful of confidentiality, but every situation is unique, and just, and sometimes it might be like a major donor, right? And you're like, oh, this feels really hard too, because she's invested so much in our organization, or she's a really big, it's a person in the community who's like a big community leader, and, it could hurt your reputation if it goes bad, right? Like I just want to acknowledge it can be really touchy. But people genuinely, if you show that you care and that you're recognizing what they've contributed, will take feedback really well. Other questions? I know you've got other things. Do you guys have a problem with everyone is on a different page? No. We feel like everyone comes to a meeting with different agenda. Okay. Other questions? Facilitation tips? Let me drop in the chat here this handout that I made for all of you for attending.
I guess I have one more question, Keegan. So on the opposite end of killing a committee, when do you decide that a new committee would be an effective move?
Yeah, I think that goes to goals, right? So if you're like, this is too many goals for one committee to tackle, is there a way to split them? Or should we do a subcommittee for a while we get something done? Is a great way. It's those goals that are really helpful, right? Because again, that's where you have those hard conversations about like, oh, that's not what we're working on. I think my favorite example is like, if you have a fundraising committee and you have a fundraising plan, right? And then someone shows up and they're like, this happened to me in Las Vegas, Nevada. They were like, hey, I think we should put on a triathlon in Las Vegas because it'd be really easy and not cost a lot of money. And it's like, oh, that's such a great idea. We can consider that for next year. But right now we have this plan, these goals, right? Like it's a really easy way to grab people back in, remind them of the purpose, and move on from there. So who do you get the quiet people to participate? If we don't call on so many people, they don't talk. I don't want them to feel attacked and stop attending. That's a great question, Emily. So a couple ways is, again, having time for people to pose a question and just have 5 minutes, because often those folks just need time to like bring their thoughts together, because it's not on their tip of their tongue like some of us operate. So I think that's one way. I think you can do just like round robin and ask like Sam, David, Charles, Linda. I'm doing this according to my screen here, but have everyone and have maybe one of your ground rules is like the opportunity to pass. And so David's like, I'm going to pass on this one. I don't have anything to add, or I echo what other people are saying, right? But just really inviting them in. So having less unstructured discussion and more structured in those ways can help people bring in. Also breaking into small groups, or like 2 people talk and then, be like, have talked with 2 or 3 people and then we'll come back to the larger group and discuss it, is another great way. Because I think it can be intimidating to talk in front of even a small group if you're new, if you don't feel like you have these skills or experience. I was on a board where I was like, everyone here is so much smarter than me, like I'm never going to talk, and so just like helping validating feelings and lifting people up and saying like, Danny, you have, spoken about this before. Can we hear what you have to say? Are you willing to share, that kind of thing? Asking permission is really helpful too.
I'm kind of a really bad example of that because I talk too much, if anything.
That's why we love you, Danny. So yep, just kind of, again, creating that agenda where there's time where maybe you can think alone or in a smaller setting, and then just inviting or doing a round robin and going around and having everyone share something, especially if someone is dominating the conversation. That's a great way to back it off a little bit, is just go by each person. So
I've got another question for you, Keegan, because
Yeah.
your wealth of knowledge. As we look at and talk about bringing ad hoc committee members on, this is something that Neighborworks Montana does quite a bit. We bring committee members on that aren't full board members, and then with the hope that when we kind of a succession plan, when we have a board position open, we can look at some of those. What does the training look like for kind of a one-off committee member that might not be on the full board? I know we probably all have different board trainings, but what would you look at doing for your training for just a single committee member that isn't a board member?
yeah, I love that. So I think part of it starts with when you invite them onto the committee. So you're like, hey, this is the purpose. These are our goals. Asking them what interests them about it, what they feel like they bring to the table, that type of thing, right? And then I love, once they're on, is having a meeting with them to catch them up, right? And then I love doing mentors, assigning mentors. So David is a mentor for Danny, and before the meeting checks in with them and says, do you have any questions about the agenda? After the meeting checks in with them and says, do you have any questions about what weird acronyms we used or why that decision had made, just checking in. If they miss a meeting, checking in with them as well. But I think that's the best way to kind of seamlessly bring someone in and help them on board faster and in a way that feels meaningful. And then they have that person they can just call and be like, what? I'm confused, or I'm stuck, or, that kind of thing. So, and it could be for like 6 months and then it's done, right? So Sam, I saw you unmute for a hot second.
I see what you did there. I was just going to share something that has been helpful lately, and I don't know if others in this space have experienced this too, but as a person who facilitates a ton of meetings, I think with like the transition to virtual meeting spaces, like we have just been hitting such a crazy lull for like the last couple of months where it's like no one wants to engage. And so like this may seem silly, but I promise you that it works. is like having some kind of, especially if it's a smaller crew, but having some kind of like icebreaker question. Like I know we all are like, oh, icebreakers, but truly, and as a person who tends to lean a little bit, if I'm not facilitating, I tend to be quieter. It's so nice to just like to share your voice at the forefront. So then you like kind of I mean, literally you feel like you've broken the ice. So it's not like, I often will get in my head and I'll be like, oh my gosh, you haven't said anything for 20 minutes. So now you're like, you missed your chance to be in this meeting space. And so that just kind of opens the door early on. And great team builder too. I think I've just seen in a handful of spaces that strategy like really bring people together, and the next meeting somebody makes a silly comment about something that someone said in the last icebreaker. So it's just, I don't know, that has been a helpful tool for me amidst all of the kind of, I think it's just like general burnout from the last like 3 years of all forms of life. So
Thanks for sharing. I agree. Another great thing too is to do like a mission moment, right? And say like, hey, I want to share this story and this is the work you did. And to remind everyone why you're there, right? I think it's really fun. Do you have an icebreaker you particularly like? I usually do like a high and a low, or sometimes like, what's your favorite karaoke song, depending on what mood I'm in. But
we did a really fun one a couple weeks ago that was, what is one thing that would be present in your like perfect utopia world? Oh my gosh, such good responses. Lots of like fruit trees and bike lanes and
awesome.
housing for everybody, obviously. That's first and foremost, but none of us are working anymore in that world, but that was a fun one. Also, least favorite bite of food you've ever had. Lots of like fun childhood stories came up out of that.
Yeah, no, those are great. Yeah. And sometimes it's good to have like, I think depending on the committee and what they're working on, but like what high and low, sometimes you just need to know where people are at, right? Or I'll do like, can you like something you want to celebrate or something you've learned since the last time we met, are good ones too. I tend not to go fun and I have to be more fun. Like I was trained by lawyers and so I'm just dry, like and naturally. And so, but also sometimes it's like, yeah, like what's your favorite summer activity, or just getting to know humans works. That helps with the unruly members and that helps with off topic. Cause then you can be like, Sam, you always go off topic. Like, this is what we love about you, but we're moving on. Like, we'll table that for next time. Like, it just makes it easier to get through the agenda and meet your goals when you have that camaraderie, you have that team building. So thank you, Sam, for bringing that up. Others? Questions, tips, tricks? This dictate thing, Janelle, you might have fundamentally changed all of our lives. Awesome. Yeah, other questions or thoughts? Or I appreciate you being here on day 2 in the afternoon. So
Keegan, do you want to pop your contact info in the chat so people can reach out should they have questions after this? I will say again, Neighborworks Montana has used Keegan quite a bit for our strategic planning process and in some other instances, and she has been a total joy to work with and is a massive wealth of knowledge. So I encourage you to reach out to her.
yeah, if you have like a quick question, I'm a little slammed the next couple of weeks, but you're like 15 minutes. I just want to problem solve this one thing. Like, I'm here for you because I mean, we all are in meetings all day long. And if you can make them better and make them where like, I always think like this email could have been a meeting, right? Like, let's change that meme to, and I think one more tip is like, it's okay to cancel a meeting. Like, even if you have a set schedule, like, and it's the day before, be like, we just don't have agenda items, or someone like, just cancel it. Like, no one is going to complain about an extra hour to their day.
And one of the things I appreciate the most about Keegan is she typically ends a meeting early. And so you have a few minutes extra that is like this magical gift that you didn't realize that you'd given. And so while we have time, and it's usually we're like 10 or 15 minutes maybe early, and it's like, oh my gosh, I can go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So just
That's
appreciate
the reason I do that is because something might come up where you need some time in a discussion. Like, this might take an hour, but if it's really meaty, we might have to go a little bit longer. And so it just depends on what group you're working with. Like, if you're kind of in sync, then you might have 10 minutes at the end of the meeting. If you're not in sync, you're gonna be scheduling another meeting.
Yes. And you're pretty amazing at facilitation. So reach out to her and utilize her as a resource, please.
Katie.
She's been
It's good
really,
to see so many familiar faces on this call.
yeah. Any last, excuse me, any last questions? I'll give 30 seconds for any dire last second questions that are burning. Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We have made it through the breakouts of our conference, and it's been a great couple of days. We want you to remember that you can always participate in community conversations through the Whova app and to chat more. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be returning for our final plenary at 2:30 this afternoon. I just want to encourage you to come. We have Dr. Megan Sandell out of Boston that is talking about housing as healthcare, and it's a pretty phenomenal conversation. And the importance of healthcare or of housing as healthcare. So please join us at 2:30 for our final plenary. We'll find out some award winners during that time for the leaderboard and the photo contest. And we will have a great time to close out the conference. Thank you, Keegan. I'll leave this room open for a couple minutes if people want to hop off that don't want to, but if anyone else wants to chat with you, I can leave this this breakout room open for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I can stick around for 10.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Keegan. We always appreciate hearing from you.
Oh yeah, I'm very passionate about the meetings that you want to poke your eye out in. We're going to change that.
Well, and all my questions were like, personally motivated, like when should we kill a committee? When should we add one? So
Yeah.
It's super helpful.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people are like, we should have committees, and it's like, should you?
Well, and
if
I'm
you
on a
support them, then
Yeah.
they're just going to fail.
I just on a board for a new foundation that really has started in the last year, and we finally made it through the bylaws and articles of incorporation and board, and I happen to be the board president. And right now we're talking about, okay, what do we start committees? Where do we start them? How many do we need? We know we should have them, but like, let's make them effective. So it's helpful to hear you speak to that. So, okay, well, we'll let you go then. Doesn't look like anyone else.
Any questions? No.
I think people are just listening to me talk to you because I enjoy learning from you.
Thanks, Katie. I'll see you in a month.
Yeah, we'll see you in Great Falls in July.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye.